Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay. It's been a pretty interesting day, an historic one, as a matter of fact. A day in which the former special counsel affirmed in public what the Mueller report put forth. It is a crossing of a threshold in terms of the public awareness of what happened and how it conforms to the law or not. The president likes to have his poster that said the Mueller report took this many days, cost this much money, this, that, and the other. Well, we have a corresponding contradictory chart. Mueller investigation by the numbers. $40 million recovered for the U.S. government. Remember, he said how much it would cost? Less than that. 37 people and entities charged with crimes, 25 ongoing criminal cases referred, 7 convicted, including 5 top Trump campaign officials. And then he had no collusion, no this or that. 10 instances of obstruction, yes. No exoneration. That's some of what we heard today. I just want to go to another point, that at the same time as we're on this path of the Mueller investigation, to recognize that the Mueller investigation was prohibited from looking into the president's finances. And that is what our committees of jurisdiction have been doing. As we legislate for the good of the American people, we're also investigating so that we have the grist for the mill to litigate in court. And those cases we've won in lower courts. They, of course, appealed. We feel strongly about our position, about the position of Article 1, the legislative branch having the right to have oversight over every other branch of government. But that's important because it means we can get the information to show the American people what the obstruction of justice was further all about. I'm very, very proud of our committees, the Judiciary Committee and its great chairman, Jerry Nadler, the Intelligence Committee, great chairman, Adam Schiff. We're going to hear from them now. And we're also joined by Elijah Cummings, chair of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, a committee that is winning its courts in case as well. So I'm going to yield with great respect to all 3 of our chairmen, and then we'll take some questions. First, I'll yield to the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, the American people heard directly about what the special counsel investigation uncovered as to Russia's interference in the 2016 election and the president's cooperation with it and obstruction of justice. Mueller made clear that the president is not exonerated. Mueller found evidence of obstruction of justice and abuses of power by the president. The report said the president could be indicted for obstruction of justice after he leaves office. Mueller found that Trump would and did benefit from Russia's help, and that the campaign welcomed that help. Mueller found multiple instances where all 3 elements for charging criminal obstruction of justice were met: trying to fire the special counsel in order to stop the investigation, trying to have people lie and cover up for him for the same purpose, trying to limit or impede or constrict the special counsel's investigation, trying to tamper with witnesses, cooperating with investigators. All of these were found with great evidence. President Trump went to great lengths to obstruct the special counsel's investigation. Anyone else who acted in this way, if they were not the sitting president, would face criminal prosecution, would face indictments. Only the Office of Legal Counsel's opinion that you cannot indict a sitting president has saved or is saving the president from indictment, because all the elements of these crimes were found with substantial evidence, and the people have now heard this. The president's chant of no obstruction is nonsense. His chant that he's been totally exonerated is a simple lie.
First of all, I want to thank Director Mueller for a lifetime of service to the country. From his days as a young Marine in Vietnam, through his decades of service as a prosecutor, as the director of the FBI, and through his service as special counsel, this nation owes him an enormous debt of gratitude. So Director Mueller, I want to thank you personally for all of your service. Today, the director outlined in powerful words how Russia intervened massively in our election, systematically in a sweeping fashion. How during the course of that intervention, they made multiple approaches to the Trump campaign. And far from shunning that foreign involvement in our election, the Trump campaign welcomed it, made full use of it, put it into its communications and messaging strategy, and then lied about it. Lied about it to cover it up, lied about it to obstruct the investigation into that very attack on our democracy. Part of what I found so powerful about his testimony today was not just when he was asked about the law, but when he was asked about the ethics, the morality, the lack of patriotism of this conduct. And perhaps one of the most chilling moments, I think, in our committee was when he expressed the fear that this become the new normal. And of course, I think what is animating that fear of the director, what certainly animates it for me, is the fact even after the nightmare of the last 2.5 years, the President of the United States will still not forswear receiving foreign help again. That to this point, the President still continues to call this Russian attack on our democracy a hoax, something that Director Mueller today directly refuted. That he still calls a witch hunt, something that the Director Mueller today directly refuted. And so we go into this next election more vulnerable than we should be. We can't control completely what Russia does, although we must do everything we can to harden our election defenses, to make sure there are paper trails, to make sure that we deter and disrupt any kind of Russian intervention. But we cannot control that completely, but we can control what we do. And Director Mueller made it clear in no uncertain terms that it's up to us whether we act ethically and patriotically, whether we refuse to be a party to a foreign attack on our democracy. And once again, I thank him for his service.
Thank
Thank you very much. I first want to applaud Chairman Nadler, and who heads our Judiciary Committee, and certainly our Chairman of our Intelligence Committee, for what they did today in their committees. What they did was paint a picture for America. One of the most chilling things that I have noticed, that I've witnessed, is when a former member of our committee, Mr. Amash, a Republican, went to a town hall meeting and got a round of applause in a Republican district after he had said that he felt that the president should be impeached. But that wasn't the thing that got me. What really got me was when a lady at the end of the town hall meeting said, "I didn't know that there was anything negative in the Mueller report about President Trump." That says a lot. And to her credit, our speaker made it clear that we needed to paint a picture for America, so that they could fully understand what is going on. This is a critical moment in our country's history. Don't be fooled. And it is a moment which people will be talking about and reading about 300, 400, 500 years from now. And they're going to ask the question, what did you do when we had a president who knew the rules and knew that our founding fathers had done a great job of creating a constitution and had put in all the guardrails, but never anticipate that we would have a president that would just throw away the guardrails? And that's why what happened today is so critical. it was a giant step in making sure that the American people got a picture of all of this, and hopefully will look towards the future and say, we're not going to have this. Both Mr. Nadler and Mr. Schiff said something that's very critical. This isn't normal. And we have gotten we're now getting so used to normal, to this kind of conduct by our president, and by the way, of our attorney general and our Republican colleagues, that it looks like people are just going to accept it. Well, we refuse to accept it. And then in my committee, we constantly, and I know Schiff and Nadler have heard this, people say, oh, you're just messing with the president because you don't like him. It's not about not liking the president. It's about loving democracy. It's about loving our country. It's about making a difference for generations yet unborn. That's what this is all about. And I'm begging the American people to pay attention to what is going on. Because if you want to have a democracy intact for your children and your children's children and generations yet unborn, we have got to guard this moment. This is our watch. And again, I am so very proud of the Judiciary Committee. I am so very proud of the Intelligence Committee, because they went in and tried to pull out the facts so that they could paint the picture so that America could see it. And hopefully they will not be ladies like the lady at Amash's town hall meeting, who says they didn't know that there was something wrong that Trump did with regard in this Mueller report. And so, again, the speaker is absolutely right. She told us a little bit earlier that she wants to gather all the information and make sure that we have everything we need to paint that picture. Now, what the American people do with that's another thing. But we will not stand by and fail to let them see the total picture. And I want to I too thank Mr. Mueller for coming forward for his service to our country. But last but not least, it is so interesting that when Mueller would make a decision that they liked, they said, oh, we love you, you're the greatest thing since ice cream. But then as soon as he says something they don't like, oh, you're a bum. Come on now. We have to see through that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, as we acknowledge the greatness of our chair, Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff, I also want to acknowledge the greatness of Elijah Cummings, the chair of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee. He has really won the first case, the Mazur decision, which his research enabled us to take to court. We won the case. The decision was a complete, beautiful statement on the ability of Congress to have oversight. That's right. Just a remarkable decision, and now, of course, the administration is appealing it. But I thank you, too, Mr. Cummings, for your great leadership and where we're going next. Because, as you know, the Mueller investigation could not do the president's personal or business connections, and one of those connections could be to the Russians, and that's what we want to find out. So as we go to questions, I just want to say that I do believe that what we saw today was a very strong manifestation, in fact, some would even say indictment, of this administration's cone of silence in their cover-up. This is about the oath we take to protect and defend the Constitution. But some of the actions that the administration may have taken, and we'll see through our investigation, may have jeopardized our national security by strengthening Russia's hand and interfering in our elections, undermining democracy, not only in our country, but in other countries as well, upsetting our preeminence as a democracy in the world. This is very serious. Today was very important. Again, salute our chairman, all of our 6 chairmen who have been involved in this, And now we can take some questions. Okay, so who do you want to hear from first? You guys decide. Wait a minute, how about a new person? Katie, okay, she's having a baby, we have to go there first. As a mother of 5, I you know.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, what you saw today, did it change whether or not you think the House of Representatives should launch impeachment proceedings?
My position has always been, whatever decision we made in that regard would have to be done with our strongest possible hand, and we still have some outstanding matters in the courts. It's about the Congress, the Constitution, and the courts. And we are fighting the president on, in the courts.
Madam Speaker, it would be clear here. I'm sure you're expecting, Speaker, I'm sure you're expecting more of your members.
Excuse me?
Can I just follow up? Some of your members told us over the course of today that they were expecting imminent action of some kind.
No, I don't know
from
why they
House
did.
leadership. What are the very
I
next
don't know why
steps
they
you plan
thought
to
that. They came to me and I said, I don't know why.
Very next step is the lawsuit.
Yeah. Again, the lawsuits, we have a number of lawsuits. You want to speak to that, Jerry? Please.
Well, the very next step, I'm not going to talk longer range, the very next step, either tomorrow or Friday, is we're going into court to enforce, to ask for the grand jury material and to enforce the subpoena against Mr. McGahn. And that's particularly important because the excuses, and I won't call them reasons, the excuses that the White House gives for McGahn not testifying, the nonsense about absolute immunity, et cetera, are the same excuses for all the other fact witnesses. And if we break that, we'll break the logjam.
Madam Speaker, what about, where do you stand right now? What do you need to know on impeachment to say, okay, we don't know enough yet?
Did I just not say, we're waiting to hear from the courts, so we have our subpoenas in the court and the subpoenas are for information. And when we get that information, we can make a judgment.
So that will be the telltale sign about whether or not you
Yeah,
have
what,
enough
we
information
have
if those
several
court cases are
considerations.
full.
It's about what information is there, and this isn't endless. This isn't endless. I understand that. But we have live cases in the courts. We have some that are going forward that Mr. Chairman Nadler just mentioned. It isn't endless, but would strengthen our hand to get that information. Remembering that in the Watergate was when they got the information in the tapes that broke the case. It wasn't just about changing public opinion. That helped change public opinion. But it's not about me. It's about our caucus. It's about our country. As I say, there's a cone of silence in the White House that is engaged in a massive cover-up in the obstruction of justice. Those obstruction of justice charges, as has been demonstrated today in the hearings, could be indictable offenses by anybody else, not the President of the United States and the President when he's no longer President. But the American people, I think that if we go down that path, we should go in the strongest possible way, and that's all I'm going to say about the subject. We have our distinguished chairs here.
Let me say something. And I know Chairman Schiff and Chairman Nadler would repeat what I'm saying. You know, the American people in the last election, even from Trump districts, said we want to make the president accountable. A lot of people loved him. They like him, but they want to make him accountable. And we have been stonewalled with regard to getting information, access to witnesses, and getting documents. All of us have. Remember, the president said, "I'm not. I'm not going to give you anything really." And so, again, the speaker is absolutely right. We're gathering information, and we are met with significant force, but we're plowing our way through. But all of that information, piece by piece, is like a mosaic, paints the picture.
Speaker Pelosi, but you have long said that there's no point in moving forward with an impeachment inquiry because Republicans controlled the Senate. It's going to die in the Senate. Is that no longer your
I have
chief
never
concern?
long said that. I have never long said that. If we have a case for impeachment, that's the place we will have to go. The fact that why I'd like it to be a strong case is because it's based on the facts and the law. That's what matters, not politics, not partisanship, just patriotism. I don't care, I'd like the Senate to be responsible and honor their oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution, to see the challenge this is to our national security, what the Russians trying to do to our country. But the stronger our case is, the worse the Senate will look for just letting the president off the hook.
Speaker Pelosi, even after the
God, we have
hearings,
these great chairmen here who know
And I
so much,
respect them as
please.
well.
I'm gonna start asking them questions if you,
even after these hearings, the president said he's completely exonerated,
You-
despite
please,
what
come
Mr.
on,
Mueller
come on,
said.
come
So
on,
what
come
have
on.
these hearings really
Please,
changed?
let me just say this. You give me the opportunity to say this, and then I invite my chairman to close. We want to have the strongest possible case to make a decision as to what path we will go down, and that is not endless in terms of time or endless in terms of the information that we want. But if it comes to a point where the cone of silence and the obstruction of justice and the cover-up in the White House prevents us from getting that information, that will not prevent us from going forward. In fact, it's even more grounds to go forward. My colleagues?
I just want to just echo that. You know, Martin Luther King said something that is in the DNA of every cell in my brain, particularly right now. He said, there comes a point when silence becomes betrayal. And we refuse to betray generations yet unborn and the American people. We're not going to betray them. And the more we're accumulating information and doing the best we can. Again, with a force as great, I don't know how many lawyers the president has, but he's got a lot of them. And they go against every single thing we do. And so, again, we're not going to betray America. We're going to do our part to make sure that we have a democracy that's intact.
Jerry?
The United States is a democracy. It must remain a democracy. A democracy acts through the elected officials with the consent of the people. The people cannot give that consent unless they know the facts. Today was a watershed day in telling the facts to the American people. With those facts, we can proceed. And we face a time of great danger. Richard Nixon said he thought that the president was a dictator. He said if the president does it, that means it's not illegal. President Trump echoed that yesterday. He said under Article 2, I, that is he, can do anything I want. That is a totalitarian picture, not a democratic picture. The United States must be saved from this. So we have to paint the picture of what's going on, a picture of someone who gladly accepted help from a foreign power interested in subverting our election, our democratic election process, and that's what it is, subverting our election process and taking the choice of our president to some extent away from the American people. That's what the Russians attempted to do, and that's what the Trump campaign welcomed them in doing. A president who engages in crimes, repeated crimes, to cover up these unpatriotic and dictatorial actions. And this cannot go on, and it's up to Congress to safeguard the Constitution, and we will do it.
Chairman Nadler?
As I mentioned today during our hearing, I think the story of the 2016 election is really a story of disloyalty to country, about greed and about lies. And if there's anything that I think symbolizes those three strands of the 2016 election, it was Moscow Trump Tower. It was this massive real estate project that the president was trying to consummate while he was running for president and concealing it from the country. This, I think, demonstrated disloyalty to the country by deceiving the American people about this massive business opportunity he was seeking while he was running for president. It's certainly a vivid example of the greed of people involved with that campaign and an ample demonstration of all the lies that permeated the campaign and its aftermath. That, to me, is the story of the 2016 election. We need to make sure that is not the story of the 2020 election. And I'll say this on the issue of impeachment, which I view in very much the same way as the Speaker. Maybe I'm just an old prosecutor, but before I brought a case to indictment, I wanted to make sure that I had the strongest evidence possible. I wanted to understand my case. I wanted to be able to make my case. Now, I tried an impeachment case in the Senate about 10 years ago, a corrupt federal judge who was convicted. So I have some understanding of what it takes to get a conviction in the Senate, and I have no illusions about getting a conviction in the Senate. But there are two juries in an impeachment. There is the jury, which is the Senate, which decides removal from office, and then there is the jury that is the American people. And I'm most concerned about the jury that is the American people. And before we embark on a course as significant to the country as the impeachment of a president, I want to make sure that we can make that case to the jury of the American people.
One of the guide, and I thank our distinguished chairman, so proud of all of them, but just following up on the last statement by Chairman Schiff, e pluribus unum, that's the guidance our founders gave us. They couldn't imagine how many we would be or how different we'd be from each other. They want us to remember that we are one. So when we go down this path, we want it to be as unifying for our country, not dividing. And that's why we want it to be the strongest possible case. President Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. Well, in order for the public to have the sentiment, the public has to know. So I hope you will be messengers of the truth to the public. We think today was really a milestone in making that, that sentiment be more informed. Thank you all very much.
Right now, they want to come right now.
How much? 10 seconds.
10 seconds. What's that? Pick up a card. You can sit here if you want. Okay, so you want me to talk to that? Yeah, just sit right in here. Okay, you want me to talk to that? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And a lot of discussion about impeachment has been a topic that has actually been significant more than watershed policy moments ago. The speaker making this very direct comment about impeachment, making it clear it is not off the table. It is not an immediate course of action. Making it clear that she wants to get what the information before how long that takes is still an open question. She said it will not be endless. And when I asked her directly about the law, the contention for some time that the Republican-led Senate will not convict the president, making it unnecessary of sorts, making it harder for the House to move forward with impeachment proceedings. She pushed back and said that is not the standard. Whether or not the Republicans go along with it, she said it's about getting information. So she has in the past said very clearly that the Republican-controlled Senate is a place where impeachment votes could die because the Republicans are unlikely to take it up. That was part of what she has been saying for some time, but pushing back there, making it clear that is not what she's concerned about. Is an interesting, comment from the speaker. She says she does want to see what the court proceedings eventually draw out in terms of information. Now, what that exactly means is unclear. Whether or not they're just simply with delay things even further. Court proceedings will play out for some time. Right now, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee announced they are going to move forward on 2 lawsuits related, planning to move forward with, one, to get grand jury information related to the Mueller probe, and two, to try to compel the former White House counsel, Don McGahn, to turn over records and also testify before his committee, but those court proceedings could take some time. So what does that exactly mean for the Speaker if she will actually rule in green light before going forward? We know that more members of the caucus are almost certain to come out and support impeachment in April. She's not there yet, but it's signaling at least that she wants to support play out and see where that leads on the question of open records. See if it's up there.
Guys, McCarthy's in the green.
We'll be about like 2 minutes.
Oh, thank you.
Heads up.
Good evening. Today was a historical day. I listened to the speaker. It was a historical day because today is the day that we close the book on this investigation. It is time that America turns the page. It is time for America to move forward. The Democrats have to stop wasting time and trying to have a do-over of the 2016 presidential election. For more than 2 years, Democrats have obsessed about the Mueller investigation, going as far as falsely accusing that they had evidence of collusion, which we found that to be true today. We heard today only helped to reinforce the facts that there is no collusion and there is no obstruction. It is well past the time to put this country first. The Democrats are more focused on bringing down the president than they are of building up America. We've gone to roughly 200 days of this new Democrat socialist majority. Name me one thing that they have solved. We have a challenge on our border. We have a trade agreement that could build more jobs, make America stronger and more prosperous, but they will not bring it up. We have a challenge in our health care when it comes to surprise billing to thousands of Americans. Again, they've only focused on the Mueller investigation. Today is the end of that chapter. Today is to put politics aside and put people first, to put this country first. Now I'd like to call up our Republican leader of the Judiciary Committee, Doug Collins.
Thank you, everyone. I think what was interesting today, and it was just said a few minutes ago, is there was a painting a picture. That the Democrats said they want to paint a picture. Well, why don't we start with today? Let's paint the picture of today. What did we find out? Mr. Mueller came here today, and actually, for anybody who wants to separate collusion and conspiracy, we put that to rest today. That's a synonymous term, and even in his report, he said so. So for all the accusations out there that said there's collusion in plain sight, there's all this out there, we put that to rest today. We're painting a picture. When they tried to paint a picture today by putting up slides today and talking about obstruction and going through these different acts and even putting green check marks beside it, and then at the end, when asked about it, Mr. Mueller says, I disagree with your theory or your interpretation. When we go through this, what we are seeing is, and in my committee, it's really interesting today because it was agreement on the one thing, that there was Russian and foreign interference in our 2016 election. But what has been the answer from my committee, my majority, and my chairman? To bring no bills forward, to bring no solutions forward. In fact, all we want to do is paint a picture of a president that they despise. They've done so since 2016, and for 7.5 months, that's 7 months, that's all we've done in our committee. Someone asked me yesterday, how did you prepare for the Mueller hearing? Didn't have to worry about it because that's all my committee talks about. For 7 months, all we talk about. And everything we've come up with is show hearings, dog and pony shows, running out old people from Watergate era. And what have we found? That the American people are footing the bill for a continuation of 2016 election that they don't like. So the question I have is, if we're going to paint a picture, then let's paint the picture of what's actually happening. You have a Democratic majority who has no agenda, who has a Democratic majority who has trouble bringing bills to the floor, who has a Democratic majority in our own committee where the very things that they talk about, immigration, election interference, and others, could be dealt with, but they don't bring any bills forward. In fact, even tomorrow, we're going to have another hearing to talk about the problem on the border instead of fixing the problem on the border. I challenge the Democratic colleagues, get over the election of 2016. Run in 2020 if you want. This president has put forward a great economy. This president has put forward great ideas. Run on those. Quit trying to dredge up a picture that today got painted that said your investigation is over. Mr. Mueller has done his job. He presented a report. Someone asked, did you find out anything new? The answer is no. We've had the report for 3 months, and Mr. Mueller simply said what was in the report, that collusion and conspiracy were over, and the observations of obstruction by the Democratic majority, he didn't subscribe to their theory. Neither do the American people. That's why we're fighting for real solutions instead of the continuation of the show. That's the picture that was painted today. With that, I yield to Mr. Nunez.
Thank you. I think what you see today is collusion between the Republican Party and the Trump campaign is over. There was no evidence. There was a dossier that was built and paid for by the Clinton campaign. That was the real collusion. You had collusion through a British former MI6 agent who was working supposedly with Russian sources. We didn't get any new information on that today, but the Democrats have refused to accept reality. They live in an alternative universe. So I think, as Representative Collins said, and like we said today, this is over. And hopefully this will be the end of these hearings because the House Intelligence Committee has important work to do. If you look at the national security for this country, there is nothing more important right now than passing the United States, Mexico, and Canadian agreement that's ready to go. If you look at the situation on our border, that has to be dealt with. We need real legislation to start to move through this House so it can get to the Senate. It's what the Democrats ran on. They promised solutions to immigration, and they're not delivering it. So 2 pressing issues not being dealt with. Hopefully, after today, we will begin, when we get back here in September, to work on immigration reform and to pass this very important trade agreement. I'll introduce Mr. Jordan.
Thank you. The leader and my colleagues are exactly right. It's time to move on. Understand where we're at. 3 years ago next week is when the Trump-Russia investigation began. And the FBI investigated for 10 months. Understand the big picture. The president's falsely accused. FBI investigates it for 10 months. They find nothing. We know that because we deposed Jim Comey and he told us that. And then Bob Mueller takes over in May of 2017 and he investigates it for 22 months. So here we are now 3 years later, and Bob Mueller found no collusion, no conspiracy, no coordination. It is definitely time to move on. The second thing I would say is the investigation that matters, and I said this in today's hearing, well, actually the 2 investigations that matter most now. The one Mr. Horowitz is going to have completed here in a couple months, and of course, the one that the Attorney General has tasked John Durham, U.S. Attorney, to do, which is to look into how this whole 3-year saga began that our country has now lived through for these 3 years. So those are the things that matter, and I look forward to hearing from that. But let's stop the continuous investigation into something that's we've already spent 3 years on, and let's focus on those issues that really matter to the American people.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Today, the special counsel oftentimes answered questions with one words. Sometimes he didn't have total command of the details that appeared at times. Do you have confidence that he was fully capable of running this investigation? Or what was your takeaway with his performance?
I think the takeaway for the Democrats who are trying to back channel that his performance wasn't good is they just didn't simply like the answers. I mean, it's a certain thing when you go through, and so for someone who ran a organization like he did, what was really interesting was he had 488 pages, millions of documents, the testimonies. He had a command. He had his advisors there. He answered the questions as we went through them. I think the bottom line is the Democrats didn't like how he answered them, so they're trying to find a way to salvage something. They're trying to find a way to say that what we did today actually mattered and that they haven't been wasting people's time or money. The picture that was painted today, though, was a longtime investigator who simply laid the facts out. They just don't like it.
He said at the top of the hearing, the president was not totally exonerated. Do you accept that? He was not totally exonerated according to what Mueller said?
Well, I think if you watch the hearings today and you watch both the Intel and Judiciary, and we discussed this issue of exoneration and where that legal theory that he would even come out was a very novel theory because it's never been used before. It was not something for him to exonerate, which is also a flip side to say there was not enough there to find guilt. So instead of going from the opposite side, instead of exoneration, which he was not there to do, he's never done before and none have ever done before, there was also saying that he didn't have enough to go forward on. So as we move forward again, if I was the Democrats and just as they just got through talking about it in their own press conference, I would be frustrated too because they have promised and promised and promised that Mueller investigation was the gold standard. It would solve all their problems. The problem is they got to the end and it didn't tell them what they wanted to tell.
You had the chairman of the Intel Committee lie to the American public for the last 2 years, that he had proof, he had evidence. We found that that was not true. You had the investigations, you had the report. And today, you have the hearings. You have a chairman of Judiciary who ran for his chairmanship based upon that he proposed to his own conference that he would be the very best person for impeachment. This has been their goal, but none of the evidence has panned out. The only people who have been hurt in this are the American public. I watched the Democrats' press conference. I watched their body language. I watched what they spoke of. They know this is not what they wanted to see today. It was not the answers they wanted to hear. Even when they laid out this theory, Mueller said, no, I disagree. This should be the end of the chapter of this book that we put America through. It is time to solve the problems. I understand this majority has no agenda. I understand that they can't pass something outside of a resolution. But the American public expects more from this Congress. It would be the best advice for these Democrats to put the American public first and move forward to the issues that we can solve. Yes, sir.
Leader McCarthy, you were with the president today at the White House during, I think, the hearings. What was his mood, and was he watching the hearings, and what was his take on that?
The president was working on issues. We were working on issues today. I think he had caught in some of it. He was very upbeat. I've watched this president be upbeat almost every single day. You know, with President Trump, his cup is always half full. To think what this poor president had to go through. If you sat for 3 years and hear somebody say a lie about you, and with each turn of the corner, it gets proven correct. I watched a question before Mueller, did anybody in the White House not come and testify to you? No. The number of papers before him. While you had people on the other side actually lie to the American public, ahead of the Intel Committee. That's the question that I have for the Speaker of the House. Knowing what she knows now, how can Adam Schiff still be chairman of a committee that we have to have trust in on the intel around the world when he lied to the American public?
Which issues were you
Yes.
working on?
The special counsel raised concerns that this could be the new normal as far as interference goes. He raised concerns about the president openly asking for help from WikiLeaks. I'm curious, because you want to talk about legislation, would you guys support legislation that would tighten rules to make it clear that it's inappropriate, illegal for candidates to do that?
Well, really what's interesting is this new majority came in and said, oh, we're gonna have hearings before we put bills on the floor. My committee is so paralyzed with their just obsession with this president and the fact that they believe he should be impeached, that we don't have hearings anymore. We don't have discussions anymore. And we have bills. We've put forward a bill. Some of our other members have put forward bills. They can put forward bills, but we're not getting hearings in our committee. The very committee in which Mr. Mueller talked about today, about the very threat to our existence and our election, we're not putting bills together. That tells me either they're bankrupt of ideas or they don't want to have the hearings because they would rather run the narrative of running down this president in light of the 2020 election. All I say to the Democrats, if you truly believe, it talked about love for America. Well, that love for America would actually be doing legislation. So I think those are things that we could do that would actually do, and we would support if we could get them actually to have some discussion about
So
it.
you would support making it crystal clear that the president should not have asked WikiLeaks for help?
I would just
That wasn't your question to me.
revert back to the House Republican report from last year. A year ago, we put out 45 recommendations. I would refer you to that report if you want to see things that could be done to guard our election system against fraud.
Well, let me, go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say, maybe tomorrow we should have a hearing on the very issue you're talking about, making sure our election system is safe as possible. But instead, in oversight, we're going to subpoena White House employees for all their emails. So the Democrats continue this, as the leader said, when you're so focused on stopping the president, it's actually tough to do what's best for the country, and in your specific example, tough to do what's best for our election system. So yeah, we would support moving ahead, having bipartisan focus on that, but the focus in oversight and judiciary seems to be totally on going after the president and folks who work for him.
The one thing I'll tell you as a Republican leader, I'll tell you the things we will work on. We'll work with anybody that wants to make sure that this border is secure, that we solve this crisis, that we take care of the kids. As a Republican leader, we'll work on making sure USMCA, that makes America stronger, makes us in this battle around the rest of the world, that our GDP actually grows, that more jobs are created here. We'll gladly work on that tomorrow. We'll work on when it comes to health care to make sure surprise billing, that the Americans across this country, they get a surprise bill even though they're in network, and it comes back to them. We'll work to solve that. The challenge that we have is the majority controls what's happening in committees, and none of that has happened. None of that has happened. The only thing that has happened this entire year is something to do to undercut this president. Well, now it's time to build up America and turn the page. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Leader, and honestly, this question is for all four of you. Do you have no concerns about how the president conducted himself based on the Mueller report?
No, it's very
concerns at all?
conclusive. I do not. You're asking, do I have concerns about this president who's created millions of jobs, has had the strongest economy we had in more than 50 years?
The examples of obstruction, potential obstruction of justice from which Robert Mueller did not exonerate this president. Do you have any concerns
There was
at
no
all?
there was no collusion. So how do you get to obstruction? They watched the entire investigation for 3 years, go after something where there's been no proof to it.
Did that with an investigator, we'd get thrown in jail.
I think in the questioning of John Radcliffe to Mueller answered your question rather clearly, that no, this president has not done anything wrong in the process. So no, I don't have a problem with this president.
No, I would just say this. What I have concerns about is the fact in 2016, 2 American citizens were spied on who were associated with the presidential campaign. We know that's the case. The Attorney General told us that's the case. We know that they went to the FISA court and got a warrant to spy on Carter Page, and they renewed it 3 times. They spied on him for the better part of a year, and they did the same thing with George Papadopoulos, except they didn't go to the court. They used human sources. So that, to me, is scary. Never forget what Emmett Flood wrote to the Attorney General when he said, if they can do this to a presidential campaign and to a president of the United States, imagine what they can do to you and I. If they're going to target and spy, imagine what they could. That's why the investigation Bill Barr is doing and the one Michael Horowitz is doing are so darn important. That's what concerns me, and that kind of stuff should never happen in this country, but we know it did. And the Attorney General of the United States says he doesn't think it was properly predicated. So let's figure out if it was, or if it wasn't. Let's get an answer to that, and thank God that's exactly what he's doing.
And you have no concerns about this president's
If you were
interaction
falsely accused of something, you would be ticked off too. I mean, that's the problem here. And this whole thing is played out over 3 years. And remember what we learned today. They didn't even charge the guy who started the whole darn thing, this Joseph Mifsud. He's the first guy to tell Papadopoulos to rush. He lies to the FBI 3 times, don't charge him. They charge everyone else who gave him false statements. They charged 13 Russians no one's ever heard of. But, oh, you can't charge the guy who actually started this whole 3-year saga we've endured as a country? I don't get that. That's why, again, I will say it until it's done. The investigation that's happening right now at the Justice Department is so darn important.
I'll finish up. Agree with what's been said here about the further investigation, but the question you're asking, I'll address in this. And it goes back to a certain part of the hearing. Also, remember today that you talk about, I asked a specific question, Mr. Mueller, were you curtailed, hindered, or stopped from your investigation at all? His answer, no. So it goes back to obstruction. Was his answer? No. We talk about the actions of the president. John Dean, which I thought was just a farcical hearing that we had at point, but John Dean made a very interesting point because one of the Democrats, I believe, was asked him about advice, or if your boss gave you advice, would you follow it? And he said, you got to be very careful here about folks who are like this president, who has been so frustrated, who's been attacked from day one, has been very frustrated with this, but nothing happened to this investigation. We seem to gloss over that. We seem to gloss over the fact that it never stopped and we never went.
The president tried to interfere with the investigation?
The question at the end of the day is what happened. And the question is not for the ethereal hypotheticals that the Democrats are throwing out there. To hide a bad agenda, they simply want to attack this president. When Mr. Mueller said that.
I'm talking about what's in the report.
And we answered that today, and when you come to the point when they laid out every possibility they could for obstruction, and Mr. Mueller looked at him and said, one, that I don't agree with your theory, that should tell you a lot right there.
You watched the question of Hakeem Jeffries, where he laid that all out. Mueller was very clear. Look, the only new thing I learned today is that even when Doug Collins says he's going to speak slower, that he can't. So, last question. Go ahead. Yeah.
Mr. Nunes, you brought up Boris Johnson, who became the prime minister today and indicated that he might be in some way compromised. Can you explain what you mean by that and why you think that the prime minister of the...
Well, it goes back to the origins of this investigation. So one of the frustrating things that's not in the Mueller report is who Mifsud actually is. He's mentioned in the report, I think, 24 times. So the point that I was making is that Mifsud, we know, has close ties not only to our own FBI and State Department, Western intelligence agencies. He worked at campuses that appear to have some type of relationship with multiple Western governments. He taught NATO courses. He was actually right here, just about 100 feet away in the Capitol Visitor Center in 2017, participating in a program here in the U.S. Capitol. So, and then that picture that I showed with Boris Johnson was it was a recent photo, I think less than a year old. So the point that I'm trying to make, if we really need to know more about Mifsud, either Comey said he's a Russian agent, but in the report, they don't say that. And all I was expressing is we really need to know the answer. But today, Mr. Mueller stood by what's in his report, but that really doesn't bring finality or closure to who Mifsud is. We still have that outstanding question.
What is that with regards to Mr. Johnson? Because he met with Mifsud, he would be compromised?
No, I was making the point that if this guy is continuing to hang out with NATO leaders, Boris Johnson, many others, we need to know who this guy really is, because if he's a Russian agent, we need to make sure our Western allies know about it.
This wasn't about Boris. This is about the individual. Look, very clear. It's time to put America first. It's time for the Democrats to close the chapter on this book that they have tried for 3 years. It's time to get over the 2016 election and let's solve the problems that the American public expects us to have. Thank you.